We've arrived at the week of the Rugby World Cup final, and it's the age-old rivalry between South Africa and New Zealand that's going to play out in Paris on Saturday. England nearly upset the Springboks on Saturday in a thrilling semi-final, and joining myself, Nick Cain, Nick Powell and Chris Hewett to discuss the future of the Red Rose as well as look ahead to this weekend's final is former England and Harlequins number 8, Nick Easter. Before we kick off this episode of the pod, I just wanted to give a shout out to our friends at Keith Prowse, the UK's leading provider of corporate hospitality experiences. Did you know that they have been offering hospitality experiences at Twickenham since 1979? So they know a thing or two on this. They've got an incredible selection of official hospitality experiences ranging from a live band, plenty of Guinness on tap, legendary players doing the rounds, some of the best seats in the house to watch the game, and loads more. So, if you've got a special occasion coming up that you want to celebrate or a key client you're desperate to impress, make sure you get in touch with Keith Prowse by visiting their website, keithprowse.co.uk/Twickenham. I've heard that they're almost sold out of their Ireland packages already for next year's Guinness Six Nations, so I suggest that you guys hurry. It was an interesting weekend of semi-final rugby. It was a bit of a squash match on Friday, which was followed by a near English, well, in my eyes, miracle on Saturday. Obviously, many had written us off, and we got very, very close to getting the job done. South Africa did edge past 1-point win to reach their second consecutive World Cup final. It's the middle of the day on Monday, so 2 days later now after that game. We'll do plenty of reflecting on the semi-final. We'll look ahead to the final. And joining myself, Nick Cain, Nick Powell, and Chris Hewett is another Nick. To do so, former England and Harlequins number 8, Nick Easter. How are you, Nick?
Very good, thank you. Very well. I mean, I'll be a bit better if we got through to the final, but no, all good personally.
At what point were you one of the ones who had not really given us a shout before the game?
No, I thought it would be tight. I just think, I know from personal experience and obviously from World Cup experience that, just from the intensity point of view, knockout rugby, the emotion, the freshness, England, were peaking at the right time from that point of view. They'd sort of built in, not under the radar, but less spoken about them in the group stages because obviously the lopsided draw. I wouldn't say they were written off. Everyone thought they would get through to the quarters and probably the semis. So I'm not sure where that rhetoric comes from, but just whether we'd finish first or second in our group. But, building in the group stages. And I just thought, having been a part of it myself, actually, in 07 with that sort of siege mentality where everyone writes you off and you club together. And you've got a lot of experience like we had in 07. World Cup winners and this squad has bags of experience. Lions, the World Cup final last time, winning European and Premiership trophies. That we would come in a lot fresher mental and arguably physical state than the South Africans who had played 3 of the top 5 sides. In the preceding weeks, and if you include the warm up against New Zealand, probably 4 of the top 5 sides out. Well, the other 4 sides in the top 5. And so, that goes a long way, as we saw in the last World Cup, which is spoken about a lot. England smashed New Zealand in the semi. New Zealand smashed Ireland the previous week, couldn't quite get to the same levels. And England couldn't quite get to the same levels in the final against South Africa. And, when there's small margins, that goes a long way. You then find out about the weather forecast, which suits the way England play. I know South Africa like to play a similar sort of model, but the kick chase was going to be important. And then you talk about selection of Stewart, Marler, Cole, and George Martin, and you're looking at a very strong scrum, or one that can nullify the South Africans, which did until those 3 went off in the pack. And we dominated the aerial battle against 2, diminutive wingers, world-class wingers, but diminutive wingers that the conditions weren't set up for. So with those things going around, I'm going long-winded here. I did think it would be very, very tight. And I thought we had a very, very strong chance. And, to be honest, we were the better side for most of the game, but you've got to win the game.
If we accept, Nick, that Borthwick got that selection pretty much spot on, do you also think that Erasmus, Ninaba, whoever's really calling the shots there, got their selection round their neck a little bit, especially with the rain in the air?
Yes, I think they did, but they're paid to make the big calls, and And I actually, when I was watching it, and I was watching it with family and friends and everything, said it wouldn't surprise me if he takes the halfbacks off at half time. I thought I didn't think he would. I didn't think he'd do an Eddie Jones, but look, you've got a semi-final to win here, and you've got to make those calls. And it's probably a bit harsh on Manny Lebok because the forwards weren't up to scratch. England had the better, and halfbacks, especially in those conditions, you're dictated by that split second of extra time you can get, and he was getting no time. But I think in the back of their mind, when they realised what the weather would be like 2-3 days leading into it, that they probably got those halfback calls wrong. Yes, I do think that. And then it was sort of, well, we'll see how they go. We've rewarded them for starting and winning the quarter. But it's not going too well. And, fair play. They had the balls to do that.
Did you not think it came across slightly as not a bullyish mentality, but at one point, Lebok, Reinach, Etzebeth, I think it was just those three, but they all came off in the space of about 10 minutes. And it's like, okay, Etzebeth is obviously the figurehead of that pack, or certainly one of the two or three. And then your two pivotal positions, it came across to me like toys out of the pram mentality rather than actually measured thinking from, like we say, Rassi or Nina, but whoever's actually making those.
Yeah. Sorry, someone else.
I was going to say, I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think that they'd had a really good win the previous week, and they knew what they'd got coming off the bench, and they knew what they could do, and they did it. I think that they made the calls at the right time. Etzebeth was not, the force that he was against the French. He's a tired man, I'm sure, and Reinach got absolutely awful service from his forwards throughout the whole of it. But that de Klerk is somebody who's extremely combative. I suppose one of the things is that when Farrell picked up the ball and wouldn't give it back, and Reinach was sort of around him like a fly trying to get it back, de Klerk would have been in there, and bloody well it would have been a tussle. So I think that they made the right calls for the most part at the right time. They may have initially got the calls wrong, but Pollard hasn't had much game time. And I thought Reinach had a very good quarterfinal as well. So it's a difficult business. I think what we can say is that they had the right 23.
And look, I'm not saying they were obviously the right decisions, because they were vindicated in Pollard, kicking them to the win. Snyman, who obviously came on for Etzebeth, he scored the winning try, and it was Faf who made the tackle on Billy Vunipola that led him to drop the ball right at the end, which coincidentally he also did in the game in France beforehand. But obviously hindsight's a wonderful thing. And I'm just wondering whether at the time it just came across like slightly rash thinking, but maybe Nick Easter, it was just the admission that the selections weren't quite right beforehand.
Yeah, I agree with Nick. I don't think it was rash thing. I don't think Rassi Erasmus and John Inambar do things like that. They're very, very experienced, successful international coaches. I think we can all probably see the halfback. He changed a lot at 45 minutes or 44 minutes against the French, didn't he? To Khaleesi and Vermeulenhoff, guys that probably wouldn't. So pre-planned. The Etzebeth one, I think, coupled with what Nick says, the guy's best player in the world this year, was having probably a quieter game than usual, probably a bit bashed up, but it was, I would think it's more to do with the line-out stuff as well. Mostert is, RG Snyman sometimes comes on for Mostert and calls the line-outs, but that's when they're having a decent day at the office there and they can just hit at the maximum height. And Bongi wasn't throwing too well. England were on top of line-out time, and I think they knew that would play a crucial part. So keeping your line-out caller on in terms of Mostert and taking Etzebeth off, I think that was the decision at 45 minutes. I don't think it has anything to do with throwing your toys out the pram or, right, you haven't fronted up. It was probably a little bit to do with that, because we know they go on these battle stats, if you like, and they track them throughout a game to know when the energy's dipping and when to bring people on. But I think also from a tactical point of view, the line-out was going to play a part alongside the scrum.
Just one more. I feel like we should just pay Handré Pollard his dues. And Powell, I'm going to bring you in here as I'm going to label you our resident goal kicking expert. Were you concerned that that kick was going over? It's not necessarily a percentage kick. I don't think the stats came up on the screen, but 2 minutes to go, that's a number, or however long it was, maybe a little bit more than that. That's an unbelievable kick.
Yeah, he misses. He scores an awful lot more than he misses. So I think, as probably an awful lot of England fans were up and down the country, there was a kind of resignation to it. If he'd missed it, it would have been a bonus. I think there's been an awful lot of talk about the decision in the lead up, the penalty decision in the lead up to it, and obviously that's been the major point of contention afterwards. But having seen quite a few angles now, I think it was the right call, and I think as soon as he went to step up to hit it, there was a sense of inevitability about it. I think that'll be one thing that might disappoint a lot of England fans as well. Was with 12 minutes to go, there was a feeling South Africa were going to come back. They got that set piece dominance, and you just felt that they were going to get at least 10 points. England were just unable to provide a response. I think the thing that England will be cursing will not so much be the fact that Pollard slotted his kicks, which England would have definitely anticipated happening. It would have been how they allowed the set piece to run so out of control, and how they missed a few of those chances that came their way in the period between Farrell slotting that incredible drop goal and South Africa hitting back with that first with that try through Snyman, I think it was. So yeah, that'll be the thing I think that England will reflect on as their kind of the moments that lost the game.
It wasn't just a Pollard penalty, was it? His kick to touch that from which launched the move that came up with the try was an absolute beauty. I mean, that was Henry Slade in the semi-final, 2-3 years ago. I mean, massive pressure kick. I mean, the commentators on the TV were saying, "Oh, England face a line out on their 22." Well, and then some. I mean, it was a pearl of a touch finder. That. I mean, he may not be the most exciting 10 in the world, but Christ alive, in knockout rugby, a bloke with a boot like that is worth his weight in gold, isn't he? The whole history of World Cup tournaments tell us. I mean, goal kickers win World Cups more often than not.
Yeah,
and I think that's all the evidence that you need, Ollie, to show that it wasn't a panic decision from the South Africans. I think they must have got there. They must have because they always make their selections really early, and they must have just not anticipated the weather forecast as well as England did. And with half an hour on the clock, who do you want? Do you want a guy who's going to be in a game where the ball is kicked after 3 phases tops? Who do you want? Do you want the guy who's going to do what, as Chris said, make the maximum amount of yardage and put the best touch finders and best goal kicks in? Or do you want your exciting creative fly-off? You want the former.
Well, maybe they thought in advance of South Africans, who are not the least arrogant rugby nation on earth. I think it's fair to say, although there are a few contenders. But maybe they thought they'd get hold of England early in that semi-final. And if they did get hold of them early, because England are, as Nick says, they've got through in the weaker side of the draw. There's been increasingly little bits to admire about the England game, but they've not exactly set the Thames on fire. Maybe they thought they'd get hold of England early. And in which case, somebody like Libbok, even in the rain, might have come into his own. But when it transpired that England were going to get stuck into them at line-out time, when they were going to win the aerial battle, all the things that Nick Easter has pointed out previously, maybe that's just what forced the decision. Yeah. They made their decisions earlier because things weren't happening for them.
Much like France did in the Six Nations, actually. That was a pouring game at Twickenham. And France were able to score some unbelievable tries in that game because they just killed England in that first half hour. And as you say, Chris, that might have been what South Africa were anticipating. I mean, the joke that was going round, I think a lot of amateur sports clubs in the morning, certainly mine, was when the cricketers conceded 399 to South Africa in the World Cup over in India. Can England's rugby players concede less? That was the big question that I had on my lips.
Look, let's open the England door. And there are 2 elements to this. There's obviously reflecting on their performance, their World Cup as a whole. Where do we go from here? Nick, I'll come to you as our special guest about the sort of style of rugby that England looked to play. And it was exactly the blueprint we expected. obviously there's the England way, so-called. What do you make of the fact that in order to compete with the world's better, we have to go to a blueprint that, to the neutral, is not exactly, it's not rugby at its finest, let's be honest.
No, we've got to evolve, develop. I think it's actually deeper than that. We have got to become much better ball in hand. Our attacking game, simplify everything. The set piece, the kicking, the defence has improved. To be honest, that was a bit of a shambles, wasn't it? In the Six Nations and the warm up. So, that's it. Sinfield seems to be getting his message across there, and there seems to be a buy-in. I don't want to hear any of this old flannel about how long it takes for an attack to evolve. I think we've seen, certainly from the developing nations in this World Cup, that actually you don't need mountains of years of time with the same players and same group of players, and one injury knocks you off course. That's a load of old hogwash. They need to develop their attacking game, because yes, you will get games like you did on the weekend in those conditions where there's not much with ball in hand, but if you're able to maybe threaten a few times, you can make inroads like South Africa did when they got their act together. But generally, the way the game is now, you need to be able to score tries. You need to threaten to score tries. And the more often you do that, the better England are going to become at executing and taking those chances, because big games are always won about the team that takes the chances when they come along, whether it's goal kicks, whether it's through great attacking play, or whether it's a set piece breakout play that South Africa did so smartly 10 meters out when England thought they're going to maul them. And the more often you put yourself in that position and you're less risk averse, the better we'll be. But we definitely have to evolve that side of our game, and it has to happen sharpish.
Does this mean that obviously the discourse around this game itself has been, almost overwhelmingly positive? Hope for the future, turn over a new leaf, paves the way for the new era, so to speak. Does that mean that you're not taking it to be that necessarily, when obviously what we saw is we didn't score a try that game? Yes, we only conceded one. And obviously throughout the World Cup, by a game and a half into the World Cup, Joe Marler's forehead had more try involvements than the whole of England's backline. Does that mean that it's, you take the sort of positivity that's enveloping this discussion around England at the moment with a slight pinch of salt, in that we still don't have a firing attack and haven't really had one since the semi-final against New Zealand back in 2019?
Yeah, what's great is that everyone likes to see full-blooded commitment, big game. ITV had its biggest viewing figures, and we've reconnected with the fans. It appears we've reconnected with the fans, which is brilliant, because being there in the autumn internationals last year, I've never known anything like it. It was depressing, and that's sort of run through for a year, isn't it? But that's great. But we can't waste the opportunity, and I think everyone agrees on this call. But for it to happen, in my opinion, for it to happen quickly, Steve Borthwick needs to get an outside thinker into his team. I know Felix Jones is coming on side from South Africa. He's probably been, how much has he had to do with South Africa developing their game in the last 18 months? Prior to obviously the conditions we got on the weekend, I don't know, but at least that's a start. Because otherwise, everyone that's there has been in and around Steve, whether it be at Saracens in his playing days or at Leicester when they won the title. And, we know what their philosophy is, and that's great, but you do need another pair of eyes, a fresh outlook, not a fresh outlook, a different outlook on the game, and someone that's been successful in the international game. And if that's Felix Jones who's coming on board, then great. But let's hope Felix Jones has more of a say on the England attack than he had in the South African attack, until the last sort of year. Because for the last 6 years with South Africa, or whatever it was, since 2019.
Without wishing to sound too much like Gordon Brown, although I do generally sound like Gordon Brown, I agree with Nick. It takes us back to 2010.
You've got quite a lot of opportunities to say that with the panel today.
I think there's quite a serious risk of far too much being read into that single performance. I mean, seriously, Wales nearly did that to South Africa in 2019. I mean, they lost just as narrowly, basically. I mean, it was a game that went to the death. Wales lost the game to the death, and no one pretended that was a great, a great sparking of a brave new future for Wales. I do think England's attacking game is dreadfully limited, and I think it's brightened up a little bit with Earl at number 8, weirdly, because he does some unexpected things at pace. And I think that's what England is sorely lacking. It may have been that someone like Zach Mercer could have done the same thing had he gone, although he's probably not as quick as Earl, but he's certainly got sort of Nick Easter type ball skills and all that kind of business. So I do think that the England game plan has been incredibly claustrophobic. And I don't really see, without the change that Nick's been speaking about, and fundamental change, that it's going to open out anytime soon.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that entirely. I think that the attack is stultified, but the thing that can't be ignored is that England are not going to win anything at all, until they sort out their scrum. And it's fundamental building blocks, and they lost the game and the chance to be in another final on Saturday because they got it. They've got their selection wrong all the way along. But the difficulties are that if you look at what has happened to scrummaging in England in the Premiership and maybe to a degree below it, is that we haven't got any props coming through. That's the problem. The fact was that Joe Marler is an outstanding loosehead. He's from a different generation almost. And Dan Cole's definitely from a different generation. And he and good on him. He restored a reputation that took a massive hammering 4 years ago. And they gave England a platform to play off in this game that they haven't had during the rest of the World Cup, because these two guys have been coming off the bench the whole time. They're clearly the best scrummagers that England have got. And, perhaps the biggest mistake that Steve Borthwick made on Saturday night was taking them off. They should both have played the game out. It was a massive mistake. And the evidence about, having props like Ellis Genge and Kyle Sinclair, who are fundamentally ball players and good ones too, no question, good footballers, both of them, but neither of them have got the scrummaging gene. They're there not because they enjoy that particular contest, and they haven't been up to it at test level against the best test opposition for the last 3-4 years. And what's been going on? We've got a bloke in Conor O'Shea who's meant to be the performance director. What's happening with props? Why haven't we got any tight heads? It's I'm looking at the lineups in the Premiership this last weekend. One of the games, both of the tight heads, they're not English qualified. There are only, you've only got 5 games in a weekend. There are only 10 Premiership clubs left.
I'm just going to interject here and bring Nick back in and ask what's your view, Nick, on the prop situation in the UK at the moment? Because I think I agree with what's been said about Carl Sinclair and Ellis Genge, and that they're fantastic in the loose, and their scrummaging shortcomings were exposed somewhat.
They're good in the loose. They're
very good in the loose. But Nick, Will Collier, who obviously played at your club Harlequins, Varapar Varuskian, Nick Shonert, there's not a lack of scrummaging, very strong scrummaging props in the UK, I feel anyway. Or sorry, in England. England.
Yeah, look, we've got the players. We've got the size. I mean, just the sheer numbers. What I've encountered, so I'm director of rugby at Chinner, which is National One club, right? So I won't, mention names or clubs or anything like that, but I've had a few players come on loan, and it's generally props, locks, back row, and in the last year that I've been there, and I'm looking at these guys, and there's a couple here. One was a prop, one was a second row, and they've got the mindset. They're aggressive, right, for a start. They've got the size. They're, a couple of big guys, right? The feedback I was getting from the academies were, right, clearly they needed rugby, they needed time in the saddle, all that sort of stuff. Feedback I'm getting is there's certain behaviours, right? And this is very much an English mentality, i.e. hitting objective metrics. Body fat is too high. Don't bring their notebook to a meeting all the time. Their academy house is a bit untidy, or whatever it might be, right? So it's stuff that, look, we want to be, polite and hygienic and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the deep, dark arts of the front row in the 68th minute of a pressure game, do you want the guy that's up for the fight and has the weight, has the power, and has learned a technique and is hungry for the fight to be able to see you through those moments? Or do you want the guy that can bench press, 180, can tick all the objective metrics of body fat, under 100 mils, but actually when someone sticks it up his arse, he doesn't want to know, and he goes missing. But you know what? He can hit the bleep test times. He can hit all of these. His handling's great. And listen, I'm a ball ex-ball handling. I'm all for skills, and all of those sort of phrases. But you in certain positions you've got to do the nuts and bolts. And in rugby, you've got to be bone hard aggressive. You've got to have a good mentality. But if you've got the tools behind you, then that is a huge bonus. And it's very much the mentality in academies. I don't know whether the performance director, the RFU, and all that sort of stuff. I don't know the ins and outs of the chain of command and all that sort of stuff, and the conversations that the coaches have always found it ever since I've been playing. The really good coaches, the really top coaches, have an eye and an instinct and a gut feel for a good player, and can ignore their foibles and the issues they might bring, which occasionally can develop a little bit and manifest. But actually, if you can keep it under wraps and manage that personality or manage those faults, they've got so much more to give that will be beneficial to the team and the individual and the club or the nation or whatever it is. The poor coaches or the limited ones are ones that do it by numbers. Okay, it's easy to have the conversation with the academy kid at 21. You're no longer part of here because you know what? Your body fat's this, your bench press is this, your fitness test is this, and this is what we're seeing. You can't come back in an argument, in a court of law, if you like, and contest it. Whereas the brave coach will say, all right, to the guy that has hit all of these things, you know what? You're just not going to make it. You just haven't got it upstairs or whatever it is, or you're just not big enough or whatever it might be. And we don't want to go down, you've got to be big, but certain positions you do, right? It's a game of rugby. It's collision sport. And that's what I've seen in the last number of years, being at, Quins, Newcastle, briefly Worcester, been down at the Sharks in South Africa, but certainly now getting, having got these lone guys on, I'm trying to push their case saying this, I've been around the Premiership. This guy should be fast tracked in there. But, some of these guys think, they've got to hit certain markers, which actually make no difference to whether they're going to produce the goods in the pressure cooker of a Premiership game on a Saturday or not. And that's stuff that I've just seen. There might be other things going on as well. But I agree wholeheartedly with you. We are not producing right-hand side props, right-hand side locks, although George Martin, I think, has got a fantastic future. And number 8. Now, I love Zach Mercer. I think he should have gone. I love Ben Earl. And look, you can have a balance if you've got, a 6 like Courtney Laws or Ollie Chesham or what have you. But, those big back row enforcer carrier, that big right-hand lock, that big right-hand or that good scrummaging right-hand prop, we are just not producing in abundance. But I tell you, the players are there. I've been to under 18, under 17 rugby matches, and you see these giants of kids because of, yes, they are public schools, private schools and all that, because they've got the facilities, and we know how much money's gone into the conditioning and the gym and the sports side of those particular schools. But then it's the next step where I just don't think enough faith, trust, development's gone into them. And, you talk about development for a big, let's say for a big lardy 6'3", 6'2" prop, tight head prop, right? And a 6'8" gangly sort of second row. there's going to be a little bit longer time to develop physically, aren't there? From the ball handling, from the breakdown, from the other stuff, the flexibility, the mobility side, that smaller, more diminutive players in that position might shine at 18, 19, 20 in the academy. But actually, these guys just need another 3 years for their bodies to sort of catch up with them, if you like, and learn it. And I don't think enough patience and time and perseverance has been put into that. Is from my experience of being in the coaching world and the playing world.
As an illustration of what Nick's just said, and Nick came before him, I remember when Stuart Lancaster brought in a marginal gain specialist. I think his name was Matt Parker. And he brought him in from the world of pro cycling. And he'd been wildly successful in pro cycling. And a lot of us in the press wanted to speak to Matt just to find out what the hell marginal gains were and what he was doing. And Lancaster's regime was slightly reluctant for us to speak to him because they thought that the things he was doing were best kept under wraps, which is fair enough. But anyway, to cut a long story short, Mark Parker finally came up for a chin wag, and he explained in very broad terms what he was doing. And I said, well, you must be finding rugby a lot more difficult than cycling, Matt. And he stared at me and said, why would you say that? I said, well, everything in cycling is measurable. Everything. Whether you're training or whether you're competing, the whole thing is numbers. You can measure the whole thing. He said, well, that's true. I said, well, you can't do it in rugby, can you? He said, well, you can. I said, no, you can't. I said, because you can't measure a bloke's attitude when he gets a smack in the gob after 5 minutes. It's just not a measurable game in the way that pro cycling or the sports scientists in general sometimes, I think, believe it to be. And I think that's just an illustration of almost a philosophical problem that professional rugby has in its sports science and development field.
I mean, look, you spoke actually. So if you talk about someone that we all know, all have watched, is Val Rapalva-Ruskin. Would he have done a job in the last 20 minutes? Would he have done a job in the last 30 minutes? We don't really know, because international rugby is, is a massive step up from club rugby. But what we do know is from the club rugby that he enjoys the scrum. He loves the scrum. And the sounds coming out about why he kept getting jettisoned, whether it be in the Six Nations or not, is he didn't take training as seriously as they wanted him to take training. It's like, well, that might be on the outside, but on the inside, I bet I'm not there, to be honest with you, but that to me just seems like, as we spoke about, it's sort of a bit of a cop out, a bit of an easy selection to make in terms of how you reason it with a certain player, and not enough time and thought gone into, well, how do we probably reduce that laughy jokey? As I said, this is sort of rumours coming out, or what I've been told. How do you reduce that, okay, but still manage it and still know that's a part of his personality, because we want him to be himself, and make sure we take the very, very best of his mentality towards training and get the best out of it. And obviously we know what he can produce on the field, because some players just turn it on when they cross the white line on a Saturday, and that will always be the case. As professional as you want it to be, that will always be the case.
Obviously, it's so interesting hearing you say that. Joe Marler's obviously very famous for his, not so serious character. You've obviously trained with him countless times. What's he like in training, or certainly towards the start of his career? Like, Rapalva-Ruskin is probably a similar age now to when you were training as a clubmate with Joe Marler. Yeah,
look, Joe would be hit and miss. Joe would be hit and miss in training, as I was. I was hit and miss in training, probably for different reasons. But when Joe was on it, I tell you, when Joe was on it, there was at Quins for a certain period. When I retired and I coached Quins for 2 years, when he was on it in the week, you knew we were going to perform. You knew we were going to perform. He was that powerful a personality that if he wasn't on it, he could probably drag a few with him, which wasn't great. But then again, that's management. That's what top coaches, directors of rugby, head coaches of England, or whatever it is. How do they channel that to get the very best, but know that there's going to be times when you can't? It's out of your control. You can't be a control freak and manage by minutiae detail and numbers all the time. You have to a degree, realise they're adults managing people, hardest job in the world. That's why people get paid the top bucks, whatever corporations they're in for it. And sometimes you got to let them have a bit of freedom. You got to let them have a bit of space, But in rugby, as we know, you get that 80 minutes on a Saturday, and that's all that matters. That's all anyone remembers over time. The games, the result, performance, and then maybe individually how well do you do.
No, that's very, very interesting. Nick, I was going to ask you for obvious reasons. We've mentioned Ben Earl and how good he's been at number 8. I want to know, Courtney Lawes has announced that he's retiring after the World Cup. He might get, I'm sure he will get a run out this Friday against Argentina. I want to, pay a tribute to him in a little bit, but in the beyond Courtney era, what's the makeup of your back row looking like? Are you keeping Ben Earl at 8, even though he plays at 7 for Sarries? Is Billy Vunipola, let's be honest, on Saturday, and I know Chris, you'll definitely agree with me. He 2 drop balls, and he was slow out of ruck and allowed Dion Foree to break towards the try line before the South Africa try. Is he now done in an England shirt? Does Zach Mercer come back in? Basically, Nick Easter. What I'm saying is, what's your England back row going forward for the time being?
Well, I think what we need from England back row is, and it's easier said than done, is you need, just because of the nature of our international season, we don't have an international season like New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, where they have them from June, right? Even though South Africa are now in the URC, all the way through. Hello, have you got me? Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. You might have to cut this out. Are you able to send me the Zoom link to my email, please?
Yeah.
Because my battery's low on my phone, and I don't actually know where a charger is.
Sorry.
It's about to die. It's literally about to die. I don't know where a charger is.
In the West Country, as we say in the West Country, never trust a harlequin.
Mate, electricity's very expensive here. And you know what, Chris, I'm actually in the West Country now, so I'm in support of that.
Whereabouts are you, Nick?
I'm Cheltenham.
Are you Cheltenham?
Yeah.
What, in the rough part or the Georgian part?
Oh no, the nice part. Leckhampton.
Regency Cheltenham
Hill.
I realised there was a rough part of Cheltenham.
No, there is. The rough part of Cheltenham is rougher than Gloucester. Seriously, my partner's from this neck of the woods. She knows a lot about the rough part of Cheltenham. I don't want to go any further on her experiences there. Those are for her.
Where is it?
They must not put that part on the walk up to the races.
I think
I know about Cheltenham.
What you also know is that he's not living in it at the moment.
No. It's out towards the opposite end of GCHQ, basically.
Nick, what you were saying about the England back row. So I was basically asking what your back row would be now going forward and how you would manage to sort of balance. I think at the moment, it seems that number 8, obviously your primary position, the role of the number 8's changed. And the sort of 125 kilo ballast of Billy Vunipola is less effective than the likes of your Ben Earls, your Ardie Surveyors, your Caelan Dorrises, who are very good carriers in their own right, of course, but they're just so mobile. So, yeah, I just wondered what you made of the England balance going forward.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you say to the England team, you obviously got to look at who your best players are. And when I say that, you're right. Not necessarily who's playing best in the Premiership, but who would suit international rugby the most. And what I'd like to see is, I'd just like to see, if possible, and I think we've got the depth to do it, is in each position have a sort of like for like. So if you look at a back row, I would the balance they had is good. Tom Curry, good. Really, really good 7. Didn't have as good a tournament as 2019, but support play, defense, his jackal ability, breakdown ability, really, really good. Speed as well. You've got Jack Willis there, who can not be his understudy, but be his competition. Jack Kenningham, obviously being a bit Quinn's bias, but Jack Kenningham, who had a bad time with injury last year, see how he pushes through. But England are actually producing 7s, whereas they had a problem years ago doing that. Number 8, I'd keep Ben Earl there. The dynamism, what he adds, he punches way above his weight, even in small spaces, he can get you going forward. Again, another really, really good guy over the ball. A forward pack needs about 6 out of the 8 to be good jacklers over the ball at international level. And then I'd keep the sort of 6 that Courtney is, and you've got guys like Ollie Chesham, George Martin that can play there as well as second row. It would just be, how many of those guys are actually playing in that position for their club? And I think that the balance that England had in the back row, I was quite happy with. You got Zach Mercer, who could obviously be in competition with Ben Earl, similar type player, as Chris has already alluded to. There's a few other players in the Premiership as well. And then you've got sort of an Ollie Chesham or a George Martin at 6.
Any mileage in putting Marrow back there?
No, Marrow's best position second row. He's never, in my opinion, never been that effective as a 6 there. George Martin's one that I think you can really build a back 5 around in the future. And Ben Earl, I think if you get a good mix there for the rest of your back 5, then we won't be going far wrong. But George Martin, I think, hard man. He's got a good head on his shoulders. Again, from reports coming that his old man keeps his feet on the ground, whatever other people are saying about him. And technically, he's absolutely superb. Breakdown, tackle, carry. I mean, really, really high quality.
Nick, what are your thoughts about? Obviously, a few number 8s mentioned. Somebody who missed the cut for this World Cup was Alex Dombrandt. What are your thoughts about him? We seem to produce so many players who somehow they shine in the Premiership, but they don't seem to be able to make the transition. Where do you see him fitting in the future? Do you think that he's got the wherewithal? He certainly got it as a running handling forward, but do you think he's got the wherewithal to reimpose himself and be a challenge at number 8?
No, he's a wonderfully talented player. He's a big bloke. He's very, very, very explosive for a big bloke. What he needs to do, what Alex Dombrandt needs to get better at is, we know how wonderful he is in the sort of 15 channel and, the relationship he's got, certainly with Marcus Smith at Quins and the lines he runs and his handling ability. Is the close quarter stuff for me. I mean, the hard yards. Rarely does it for Harlequins because, Premiership's a different level. You can get away with 6 or 7 forwards doing that. But at international level, you look to your number 8 to take 2 or 3 tackles, like Billy Vunipola did, went from, 14 to 17, 2014, 2017, when he was the best, one of the best in the world. He would win games for England, taking 3 tacklers every time. He was incredible in that facet. And also from a defensive point of view, hitting, sticking, going beyond the gain line. It's all about gain line as a number 8 at international level for me. Even when you talk about Ben Earl, who might not have, the weight behind him, but you look at, how hard he hits, his leg drive afterwards, when he carries, and he hasn't been carrying a lot in the wide channels like he does for Saracens in this World Cup. He's been carrying close quarter. He's been the man to get him over the gain line, and his footwork and explosiveness and body height and all of that sort of stuff. He's doing a job, and it's not just what you look like. Are you doing a job? And for Alex Dombrandt, this season's a massively important season because there is opportunity, but that close quarter work in and around the ruck, off 9, whether it's defensively or carrying, he's got to be winning those gain line meters. He's got to be getting his head in the spokes defensively. He's got to be getting his head in between defenders and getting that go forward for Harlequins to get back in that England side, because otherwise it just becomes a little bit too much of a luxury player. At international level, you need everyone to front up.
Look, I'm conscious of time. I think we'll have to move on. But like I mentioned just now, the last thing we'll say on the England front before we do a quick player of the semi-finals and moment of the semi-finals roundup, which we do every week after every round of fixtures, is obviously Courtney Lawes' retirement. We've mentioned incumbents Chesham, Martin playing 6, but Nick, they're going to have massive boots to fill because Courtney Lawes is, I think, one of the greatest England forwards of all time.
I agree with you. I was speaking to an ex-England colleague this morning, and I was flinging through the BBC website, said he announced his retirement. I completely agree with you. I think he's been phenomenal, and I hope people remember him for the last 4 years, and that is England haven't played great rugby in the last 4 years, but he has been the standout performer whenever he's played. I mean, I remember the cover tackle. Who was it against? It was against one of the islands, wasn't it?
It was Tonga.
Tonga. I mean, that cover tackle, his, in Australia last year, was it last year in Australia, the summer, was it 2022?
22.
He was man of the series. This World Cup, exceptional. I mean, his breakdown work for 6'7", I mean, he's our best jackler, let alone all the other stuff he does, line out work, his carrying, his leadership as well. It's pretty sad, actually. I think he could have been a great England captain for certainly a World Cup cycle. And going to this 4-year stretch, it's sort of coup de grace, or if you like. But although we didn't win the series, he was the best player for the Lions in South Africa in 2021. And sometimes people look back and go, "Who the greatest? Who the greatest?" Well, did they win a World Cup? Did they win a Lions? Did they win the Grand Slams? Well, he might not have done that, but look, it's a team game like none other. And sometimes you're just lucky with the coach or the generation you have. But as an individual, 100% agree with you. You got Richard Hill up there as one of the top blindside flanks. Well, he's right up there with him. He's right up there with him. And Richard was lucky enough to be in a golden generation and be in a back row that stayed together for a long, long time. And yes, we know the attritional nature of the game now doesn't allow us to do that in the Northern Hemisphere with the blocks of international games. But he's right up there with Richard Hill, right up there.
His late flowering or his Indian summer or whatever you want to call it. I mean, as Nick says, those last 3 or 4 years have been tremendous because there was quite a long spell, part of it due to injuries and what have you, but it was quite a long spell when you wondered whether he was ever going to be as much as the sum of his parts, really. But he's gone way beyond that in the last 3 or 4 years, I think. It's been a tremendous late career blossoming by him, and I've got every respect for the bloke, I must admit.
I mean, a real hallmark of players at international level and where England have been lacking in the 4 years since Japan has been consistency. That consistent driving, consistent high standards and producing at the level. And as you've alluded to, he has done that. In a pretty dismal period, he's actually pulled England through, to their best periods in that. But remember him when he first started off. I mean, that bloody exocet tackling. He did. I mean, I think in the end, it was sort of almost kamikaze stuff because he was doing himself. Initially, he did a lot of damage to a lot of people, and then he started doing a bit of damage to himself as well, I think. But he's been a fantastic player for Northampton, and he's been a blessing for England in a pretty rough period, and it shows his character.
Yeah. Add to Nick's point about consistency as well. He always had the attitude of taking responsibility for the situation and just getting on with it. Whatever was going on in front of him, whatever the game plan was, whatever the situation was in the match, just get on with it and just get. And you would rarely look at tackle stats after a game with him being anywhere under 15, even if England had dominated the ball like they did against Japan, where he made 15 tackles. And it was that Japan game as well, which I think epitomised that action of taking responsibility and playing what's in front of you and getting on with your job when the ball came off Joe Marler's head and he picked it up and scored only his second international try, which if it hadn't happened, England were in big trouble in that game. It was a fantastic show of taking responsibility in a situation, leadership, and it summed up for me his entire career of just getting on with business, no matter what.
Yeah, I think you've all put that wonderfully. And well, like I sort of alluded to at the start, I think if you put together a sort of all-time England 15, certainly since the start of the World Cup era, I think he's certainly in the discussion at the very, very least. So no, a hell of a career, Corny. And he's one of the guys who retires whilst he's still playing out of his skin, which is obviously very sad from an England point of view, because no doubt, although his body might not be up to it the way he's playing, he'd contribute. But he will definitely be missed. Okay, player of the semi-finals, moment of the semi-finals, and then we'll do a quick half hour on the final, maybe 25 minutes. How does that, Nick, is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, all right, sweet. Actually, I'll start with you. Who is your player of the semi-finals and moment of the semi-finals?
Goodness me. Well, the moment's got to be that scrum penalty, isn't it?
Yeah,
right at the end
moment
of the England-South Africa game. I mean, that's the talking point, isn't it? That's whichever way you look at it, whether it was, scrum dominance for the previous 4 scrums and or whether you feel hard done by, but ultimately I think you got to suck it up because the picture was painted for the referee. Player, I'm trying to be a Kiwi. Struggling here. Who from Friday night? I can't remember who the standout Kiwi was.
You could pretty much pick any of them.
I know.
You could justify it.
I'm trying to force Shannon Frizzell in there, and the reason I am is, which will come on to the final, is New Zealand, who didn't in the first game or in that World Cup warm-up game, have Frizzell at 6 and Geordie Barrett at 12, who make an inordinate amount of difference to New Zealand. Now, Geordie, I thought, was up there along with Sam Cain and Hardy, man of the match against Ireland, so I'll ignore him. Shall I just say Shannon Frizzell then?
He was going to be my pick. I think Shannon Frizzell was outstanding, and he would have been my man of the match, as good as Geordie was. But yeah, so you've stolen mine as well there. Chris, I'll come to you.
I would go player of the semi-finals. I mean, crikey, as Nick said, there's a load of All Blacks who could get into that. I actually go with George Martin, partly because I know it's not a direct, like in a boxing ring kind of thing, but if you see off somebody as good as Etzebeth, if you're all over a South African pack for a chunk of time, and they end up taking your opposite number off the field because he's having a rough night and he's a player that good, then that's a bit of a feather in your cap, however which way you want to frame it. He's also bright enough to wear a scrum cap so he looks less like Russell Brand, which I think is a really, really clever thing from George Martin, because he'll go...
You better watch yourself.
I know. I thought he was terrific, and my moment was the Pollard kick to touch, because that was the oh shit moment for England.
Yeah,
I think that was that moment changed the game from England saying to themselves, "There's not vast amounts of time left here. We can do this. We can, we've got this. If we get things right, we've got this." And suddenly, there's a pearl of a touch finder, and you're right in Rat's Alley. And I think they might have looked at each other then and thought,
Kano?
It's interesting. I mean, I would... I mean, we've talked about the Pollard kick, but I was at the Stade on Saturday night, and it was filthy conditions. And it was a massive, massive pressure point. And as you've just alluded to, he'd already set them up with a great touch finder earlier on. I thought his kick was, it was straight down the middle. And it was probably on the angle. It was certainly 50 meters. And when you're on a pitch, which is like a sort of, a greasy soup bowl, I just think it was a fantastic piece of, of match play, moment match play. He had to hit it, and he hit it so cleanly, and it whistled through the post. Everybody sort of thought, oh well, it was a foregone conclusion. Well, it bloody well wasn't at all. And I thought it was a fantastic, just great temperament, and great technique.
Dave Allred thought there were 12 things wrong with that kick, by the way.
Did he? Did he? Well,
I just made that up out of nowhere.
It went through, mate. That's what counts. But the other, look, there are so many, but Oxenche, you can't overlook him, and the bloke who came on the other side, Vincent Koch, as well. They I think that the 4 penalties that they got were split 2 and 2. I think Sinclair Koch, on Sinclair's side 1 and 2, and on Genge's side 2 as well. But Nche is a force of nature. He's about 5'7" or 5'8", and he's about 5'7" or 5'8" wide as well. And he just has, I mean, you can see England sort of go at them. He had one scrum against Cole, I think, where Cole went at him and he absorbed it and then he exploded.
They drove him off the ball.
Yeah. Yeah.
There wasn't a penalty, so nothing got made of it. But actually, they that's when you did have Marler and Cole, and that was his first scrum coming back on, wasn't it?
They did. They drove England back, but the real thing, and the reason that I said earlier that I would have kept Cole and Marler on, was that England were not in complete disarray. They were knocked backwards, but they didn't disintegrate.
No.
And but so anyway, listen, I'll leave it there. I mean, I've got another one as well, but I don't want to take all Nick's ammunition away from Nick Powell. So
yeah, go on, Powell. Round us off before Kano comes in off the long run again.
I've got my moment of the semi-finals when Buffelli put Argentina ahead in the third minute of the game. What Argentina managed to do with that lead. No, I'm kidding. I actually think Owen Farrell, again, it wasn't consequential in the end, but Owen Farrell's drop goal was a really remarkable moment. It was a moment where I think England fans could start to believe, got that 2-score cushion, I think, for the first time in the game. Beautifully struck. And I actually thought, apart from him being marched back, which was a pretty bad moment, I thought he led the team very well, and that was another epitomizing moment of that. I'd say my player, actually, again, it's a little bit of a dull pick, but I thought Aaron Smith on Friday night, he was just so horrible for those Argentinian forwards either side of the ruck to play against. It's just a nightmare player. Obviously New Zealand's speed of ball was so much better than Argentina, but he utilised it at almost every occasion he could. And it just sucked the life out of those front five forwards, who probably felt that if they were able to retain possession and they were able to slow the New Zealand ball down, they had a chance. He wiped that off the face of the earth. So I thought as poor as Argentina were, New Zealand were outstanding. And I would pick him out as the man who just drove them forward.
Obviously, we haven't spoken about the All Blacks too much, and obviously almost with very good reason, because we're about to. Thanks for doing the roundup, guys. I will use that as our transition into the final. There's no Northern Hemisphere team. I think all of us, when we did our predictions at the start, predicted a final with a Northern Hemisphere team, and I'm sure you would have got decent odds on neither France nor Ireland making it to the final at the start of this tournament, which, that is what it is. But what we do have is a rerun of the 1995 final, which is the most iconic World Cup final of all time. And you've got the greatest rival in rugby history between rugby's two greatest nations. Chris, I guess, well, Nick and I weren't born in 1995, but take us back to 1995.
I was there for that final. It was the first World Cup I'd covered. It was an extraordinary event, not least with the Mandela dimension to it. I mean, he was sitting just behind me, old Nelson. Actually, bless him. I mean, the number of people who said, "Who's that old bloke next to Hewett?" was were almost
zero.
It was a fantastic event. It was a fantastic event in terms of the South African sort of nation building as it was developing under the new sort of political setup there. It was an extraordinary cross-cultural, cross-community event right the way through. I don't know if any of us felt that the South Africans, the Boks. I mean, they were so recently back into our international rugby. They'd only been back in around 3 years, a little under 3 years. I'm not sure how much anyone knew about them, or by definition, we didn't know anything about them in tournament rugby. And the All Blacks were bewilderingly brilliant all the way through the tournament. I mean, they played the Lions in '93, and it had been a traditional old Lions All Blacks sort of tussle up front. There wasn't much width in any of the games, and suddenly the All Blacks are running around not just with Lomu, but there's Andrew Mertens, and there's Walter Little, and there's Glenn Osborne, and there's Jeff Wilson, and Josh Cromfeld, and they were extraordinary attacking players. And they were unleashed. I mean, the attacking rugby they played was just as dramatic. In fact, more dramatic, given the fact that it came out of pretty much nowhere. It was the kind of rugby that they treat us to now, that we become used to. They're a brilliant attacking side. I mean, with 15 ball handling players, it seems to me. The great Sam Whitelock is probably the least comfortable bloke with the ball in his hands of any of the current All Blacks, and he never drops it. So that tells you what skill levels they have. So it was a fantastic game, brilliantly refereed by my old mate Ed Morrison. Obviously the extra. Everyone expected Lomu to run over people. He was gang tackled to within an inch of his life, but it was on a knife edge. That game was on a complete knife edge all the way through. It was always going to be, I suppose, a one kick decides it contest. And that's how it turned out in extra time. It's one of the great events I've ever seen. I mean, it was Ellis Park at its most intimidating, but in an amazingly vibrant way. There was no South African arrogance about it at all. It was just a massive walk into the unknown for a country being reborn, basically. So if that's not putting it in too grandiose a fashion, that's how I felt about it.
Chris, in terms of the on the field action, do you think the two teams are in a kind of play similar styles to what they did in 1995 in terms of New Zealand having these amazing running backs and South Africa being the best team without doubt at those fundamentals up front?
Well, I mean, South Africa are pretty damn good without the ball. That's for sure. I mean, they didn't have an overpowering scrum. In '95, I mean, they had old Bailey Swart on the tight head. I mean, he was on his last legs, really. You had the young Os Durant, but he was a young player at that point. They didn't quite know what to do with the back five of their scrum. They eventually shifted Mark Andrews out of the second row and stuck him at number 8. They had Joost van der Westhuizen, who was a handful at 9. Joel Stransky was largely a kicking 10.
Stransky and Pollard, you could say, are peas out of the same pod.
You would say so. I would say that the South African centres were a bit more creative in the ball playing sense than the South African centres now. I mean, you had Henny LaRue, who was an outside half, basically. But I mean, it's a different age, isn't it? It's a completely different age. But yes, I think in the general terms that you're describing, I think the All Blacks are the guys with the running game, and the Boks are, as always, very, very well equipped to shut them out of the game without the ball if things go well. So it's a wonderful contrast of styles.
Yeah, it was a fantastic occasion. I mean, like you, I was in Ellis Park that day. It was a fantastic occasion. I wouldn't say it was a sort of a game for the purist in a sense, because they cancelled each other out. I mean, it was brutal. It was, and there was nothing in it at all. They'd worked out a plan for Lomu, and it worked. And it came down to the finest of margins, a little bit like it has for them against France and England in this World Cup. So, sort of taking it on to to this weekend, are they the same? No, they're not the same sides that they were then, I don't think. But the margins are likely to be about as tight. The only thing that you'd say is that there's one side going into it who's pretty well rested, and and the other one has got a fatigue factor.
I do think that the highlight of that game, apart from the Nelson Mandela thing, was when the All Blacks in extra time brought on Richard Lowe at tight head, and Ed Morrison said to him, "This has been quite a clean game under the circumstances. I don't need you cocking it up."
Do you think with Rassie Erasmus constantly wanting to push the boundaries and be innovative or Machiavellian, whichever way you want to go about it, do you think he'll try and locate the chef that was at the All Blacks hotel back in '95 and fly him in? And no one will recognise him because it's 28 years later, and fly him in for the meal the night before.
Well, they won't recognise him because it was a woman called Susie, apparently.
Oh, right, sorry, I had no idea who was accused. No idea who was accused or whether it actually happened. But
that was it. Well, who knows what the hell happened there? I mean, there was a bit.
Nobody's ever managed to track her down, Nick. That's the thing. She disappeared into the sort of realms of myth, I think.
Until she's appointed poisoning coach by Razzie.
Yeah. Well, yeah, good old. I do actually think though that Erasmus, that All Black side's pretty settled, isn't it? I mean, you could name. I mean, they may have a decision to make it hooker, maybe but they're picking from some strength there. But probably Cody Taylor gets a nod, you'd assume, and they have to decide which of three sort of top end second rows start the game. I mean, would they bring Retallick back, stick Whitelock on the bench, and on the basis that the most experienced guy sees them home? Who knows? But everything else is in place. I do think Erasmus has got more selection decisions to make.
And he's got a potential. I mean, look, Mbonambi has played pretty well, but since Marks went, he's had to carry the load pretty well.
Yeah, and who knows if he'll be available?
Yeah.
Well, that's another that's another hornet's nest. But I mean, if he is even if he is available, if he's got to go another full 80. That's a big call. I mean, he looked as if he was a very tired man at the end of proceedings on Saturday, and he was also captaining this. At that stage, he was also captaining the side. I would say that
there might be another 20 onto that 80 as well. Given how closely matched the teams are, that making your subs on 45 minutes for an 100-minute game, if you include extra time, you're spot on about him having a lot to think about, Nick.
Are we assuming that Libbok is not going to start the final?
I am. I don't see how you make that call. We've spoken about Handré Pollard being the knockout animal. How do you not pick him?
Well,
the issue. I feel bad for Manny Libbok, obviously, and it's the type of thing where he might be affected long term.
Tell you what, old Nienaber was asked about this on Saturday night, and he handles himself very well in press conferences, and he said, look, Manny understands, like every other player in this, that this is about the team and it's about South Africa, and that is the beginning and end of it. And in a sense, I mean, I think who knows what the weather forecast will be. If it's for rain again, then maybe it will be Pollard from the get-go. But if the conditions are good, I don't know.
Well, that's the thing, and that's the thing with Rassie Erasmus. There's a million variables that will be going through his mind in the next couple of days. For once, though, I think this South African selection might come a little bit later in the week than it has done in the last 2 years. But let's see.
But and look, there's another thing regarding Libbok, is that he was the fly half when they ripped New Zealand to shreds at Twickenham about 7 weeks ago. So, and he played extremely well. So, there are sort of multi layers to it. Let's put it that way.
If you, and I'm sure it never happened to you, Nick, correctly, but if you had been pretty much dragged off the field under those circumstances in big time tournament rugby, how easy would it have been? Do you think, to sort of get yourself back up for the following weekend for an even bigger match if you just had the wind taken out yourselves to that extent and in the glaring publicity of a semi-final?
That will all come down, Chris, to the environment that you've shared for the last years, the World Cup warm-up, whatever it is, because if you're absolutely clear, and there's no doubt, Rassie and Nienenbar drilled a message, and, you heard that's what Dwayne Vermeulen said to Victor Matfield on text when he wasn't selected against Ireland. One team, one mission, and you put the team first, but also, if you also accept that, arguably the two things that a player wants is communication and honesty. How brutal the honesty is, it depends on the personality type, but you want to know where you stand, what you've got to work on, what's going well, and you do want to know it, is that if the environment's set up, so Manny Lebok, right, the cold light of day now, what are we, 2 days away? Okay, go through your game with, the head coach and the expert in that area, with the attack coach or whatever, or game management, and you go away and you work at it. And then if you are selected, whether it be on the bench or starting, you then use the training time, you're doing your detail, you're getting your study right. And also, again, it depends on the player. Some players put it to bed and they go, you know what? I didn't perform. I'm going to go out there, put me under more pressure in the game, whatever it is, I'm going to nail this now. I'm in a good frame of mind. Other players might need the game you're talking about. Bring up the All Blacks warm-up game. This is how well you play, mate. This is what you can do. And I think if the environment's been set up, which it appears to have been, throughout Rassie's tenure, that the team comes first and there is honesty with each other, then it won't take him as long as, perhaps what other people think in terms of, oh my God, this guy's confidence is destroyed. He's going into the biggest game of his life, whether he's involved or not, yada, yada. And, again, that's a head coach or director of rugby earning their shilling, isn't it, really?
Yeah. We're one more discussion away from predictions, I would say, from everyone. So get your heads around that, and I'll be obviously doing the rounds. But one thing I was looking at was the path to the final, the route to the final for the respective teams. And the South Africa points difference is across every single game they've played, including knockout stages, is plus 118, plus 119, something like that. New Zealand's points difference is plus 250. So it's a big, big difference. And we speak about South Africa, maybe they're beaten up, but also, and Nick, again, I'll come to you about this while we've got you. The All Blacks have only really been tested twice. And do you think they could just come into it? There's any chance they come into it a little bit undercooked, or is this a New Zealand team where they've got your Whitelocks, your Italics, your Canes, your Smiths, who have done this, World Cup final in 2015 for a few of them, World Cup semi-final in 2019 for a lot of them?
Yeah, well, that's arguably why, if we were having a discussion last week, amongst fine margins, why did they beat France and Ireland? Because France and Ireland didn't have any players, that you might have had one or two, that have experienced winning knockout rugby. And the All Blacks and South Africa did. There could be that. I don't think they will. I think they've learned their lesson. Certainly, you hear the sounds from last week. When they fell to England at the semi-final, their level of training, not necessarily intensity, but detail and refocusing wasn't on point. The guys that are around then have learned their lesson from them. So even with the ease of which they coasted through, you take the advantages from that. And let's not forget the 35-7 shellacking they took, the greatest loss in All Black history at the end of August. I mean, if that's not a motivating factor to know what you're up against more than any other team in the physical and attritional war, then, they shouldn't be in the final. And these guys should be in the final. They've timed it perfectly. They had a great game plan last week. They're hitting their straps with a group of top players that are peaking again. South Africa's point of view, you can argue they're tired, but most of their players get taken off after 45 minutes. So, and knowing what it's like myself, when you get taken off after 50, 55 or 80 minutes, your body feels a lot fresher. A lot, it's not a direct correlation to the minutes played. Actually, that last 20, 25 minutes when you're either saving face or trying to win the game or trying to hold on or trying to stretch away, that does take a lot out of you. So they have been rested. And I'm sure that Rassie and team will be, from a motivational side, right, lads, as a forward pack, you're probably never, you're probably out of 10, 4 to 6, most of you, in your individual performance. You're representing South Africa. That's what you showed him last week. And he'll know how to press the right buttons to motivate them. So I don't think fatigue will be a factor for South Africa as much as they've played, three of the top 5 and England, England at their best. in the last 6 weeks, 7 weeks, whatever it's been. I think both come in pretty fresh mentally. Because I also think it was hard for South Africa last week and New Zealand to a degree that everyone was talking about the final being them two after the quarterfinal wins. And as much as you talk it down or you try and address it, it's going to be in the back of some people's minds. Now, New Zealand obviously dealt with it better, weaker opposition on a better night for their type of rugby. But I don't think that can't be a factor. It's a final. There's no way, even with an extra day as well. There's no way. South Africa had an extra played on Sunday when they scraped through Wales last tournament, and we know what happened in the final. When they had 6 days and England had 7. Well, actually, they've got 7 days, and New Zealand got 8, so that they do have an extra day.
The way you're talking and we're all talking, it seems like it's on a knife edge. Obviously, two very, very different styles, two very, very different paths to the final. I think it's probably prediction time before we wrap up for today. I don't want anyone sitting on the fence. I want a winner and a winning margin. So I'm going to come to the king of sitting on a fence, Chewy, first.
Ollie, quickly, do you just want to throw in the third place playoff into those predictions as well?
We can do, yeah. Yeah,
I think it's just a nice touch.
Yeah, it's a really nice touch, mate. Let's throw in the third.
Sorry, when I said that, I thought this was going to be deleted. I hope it still is.
It's not going to be deleted, mate.
England are still in this tournament.
I don't even want to go there. That game should be shut down. No one
not open that door.
No one wants to play it. It's horrible. It's horrible. And I don't think it's ever been a good one.
I hope Henry Arundel plays, scores another 5 tries, becomes the first winger to ever score 10 tries in a World Cup.
That'll be fine, but I think that's a rubbish game.
I just hope Steve Borthwick and co have let the team unwind properly after 3.5 months of the intensity they would have been under, and the level of focus. And he says, right, lads, let's enjoy each other's company for 2 days, then enjoy your family for another 2. And I tell you what, let's get together on Thursday or whatever and have a light team run.
Chuck it about
a bit, yeah.
And on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely is Borthwick to come up with any of that?
Well, I know, but look, they played.
I think it'll be another scientific win. Get those bronze medals, get them in the hut.
What was actually, Nick? While we've got you, obviously, they're different fixtures and they're at different stages in the tournament. But your last game in a Rugby World Cup, it was obviously, the result was a foregone conclusion, and that's not true with the third place playoff. But for many, it's a dead rubber. How did you guys get yourselves up for that game?
Oh, well, that was it was different for me, that, Ollie, because I got called in.
Yeah, I know.
So it was sort of right. I got called in. Okay, I've done the training camp. I know it's my last game in England shirt, although it's Uruguay. But we went up. It was Man City, the stadium at Man City that it was played in. We stayed where we always stayed when Quins played Sale as well. I can't remember the hotel, but it was like you'd been at a funeral for an entire week. I mean, boys did not want to be there. Really? I mean, the natural negativity, which you don't blame anyone for, being knocked out of your home World Cup was just, it was in the air all throughout the week. We hardly trained. Even the coaching staff didn't want to be there, and you could tell that they had no enthusiasm for the training session. But that's a bit of a darker place than playing. You got to a semi-final. Yes, you want to be in the big game, but I think
that trick must have cheered you up, though, eh, Nick?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, Gatland famously, they 2-0 down in South Africa in 2009, dead rubber last game. I think the lads had one training session, enjoyed, safari and socialising and what have you, and turned up and said, lads, you all know how to play and get yourself up for a big game. You're still representing here. It's still a test match. And, you've got to trust these guys that they're not going to go there, play a game of touch rugby. Yeah. But I do think there needs to be a period of unwinding because, naturally they'll be disappointed. But with everything they've been through, I think it's the right thing to do, personally.
Yeah. No, obviously very aware that they're two very different situations, but you're right in that it's the balance between obviously getting over the loss, trying to stay positive, and also trying to unwind. So it's just interesting to hear. Right.
South Africa.
Sorry, go on.
Right. South Africa in the professional era have never beaten Australia or New Zealand in a meaningful World Cup game. Now, what I mean by that is third place playoff in '99, South Africa did beat a New Zealand team that had been on the lash for a week. But outside of that, in the professional area, South Africa, when they've won World Cups, have never had to come across Australia or New Zealand. Australia obviously knocked them out in 11 in '99. New Zealand won the group game last time and, beat them in '03, didn't they? And in 15 as well. But I don't think many people are going to write about that, but it's just something interesting that's statistic really from a South African point of view, given that they're such World Cup animals.
I don't think Rassie and Nina are going to be mentioning that to Boyd. To you.
No, but Ian Foster might.
Yeah, that's true.
I suppose they won the big one in '95 though, didn't they?
Professional era.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
You've got to get that in.
Yeah.
When you took your own chefs,
they were all making a mint. They were all making a mint even then, I reckon. But it's, I mean, there's boot money and boot money. So I look, as far as the final's concerned, I'll be quick. I tipped New Zealand at the start of the tournament. I think they win by half a dozen. But there are two things I would mention. That this is assuming that Sam Cain is going to turn in another performance along the lines of the stuff he's produced over the last couple of weeks, particularly in the quarterfinal. And the big one is if Mo'unga's got to kick his goals. If he kicks like he did against the Pumas, then South Africa win.
I think that's
although I mean they can always turn to Geordie Barrett, who is, as I keep on saying, is my new god. If you were going to invent a 12 in a laboratory, you come up with something looking very much like him. And I think he could be the difference maker. Assuming Mo'unga kicks his goals, I think New Zealand win by 6.
I forgot that you predicted New Zealand at the start of the tournament. Yeah, God, that's going to have to be some dropped in our noses if they do win.
I'm the man to do that.
We rub your face in it when you get it wrong, so I will very much be receptive to you doing the opposite. Let's go with Kano.
Well, now he's tipped New Zealand. I think I can't.
Anyone would think we weren't fellow socialists, Nick.
I've written down New Zealand 23, South Africa 18. I think I'm going to reverse that. I'm going to do a reverse merit. Listen, they're two great sides. I sort of the Mo'unga thing is important because he was 4 out of 8 against Argentina, but I suppose after a time it didn't matter. But it does matter, and it's weird because when you consider Mbonambi, who has been a very a pretty sound line-out thrower for the the last 4 years, and him having an off night on Saturday, and Mo'unga's goal kicking, they're two key players in both lineups. And I don't know. I mean, I can't call. I really can't call stuff like that. I've seen Mo'unga kick extremely well. But if it was a kicking competition between Pollard and Mo'unga, it would be Pollard for me. I hope that the World Cup doesn't come down to just penalties as the last meeting between the two in the final did. I mean, South Africa have made a habit of nicking their last 2 games by a point. I don't think that I actually don't think they're going to win this one. I think I'm going to take New Zealand, and I'll take them by a couple of points.
Okay.
Say 2018, something like that.
New Zealand. Let's go. Nick Easter, I'll come to you next.
It's tough. It's tough to split them. South Africa obviously going for back-to-back, trying to match New Zealand. Although they wouldn't have matched New Zealand because they would have done back-to-back, losing a game in each World Cup, not being unbeaten, but they still went into tougher times. There's two things. I think if New Zealand win this game, I think it'll be the aerial battle they win. They won the first rugby championship game, first 25, 30 minutes, blitzed them, especially with the short flat kicks in behind and what have you. And, South Africa aren't convincing, certainly defensively with Colby, Arendse and Willemse in the air. And obviously that was massively exposed and they were bettered by England. And with Geordie Barrett and Mwanga able to put those kicks on a sixpence, with Jordan, Talea and Bowden Barrett as well. And you saw how well Bowden Barrett kicked against Ireland, with the kicking game that against Ireland. I think that will be what exposes South Africa for New Zealand to get on the scoreboard more than New Zealand's handling game, which South Africa are used to dealing with. It's World Cups, that there's less time, there's more pressure. However, there's something in my head just saying those New Zealand reserve props, especially in the last half hour, just ain't up to it. And that bomb squad, I think could rip through the Kiwis in the last 20 minutes in the forwards. So I'm going to go South Africa 20, New Zealand 17.
Okay.
2-1 in favour of New Zealand. Very good. I think that point about the scrummaging and the New Zealand props is a very interesting one. Might just sway me a certain way as well, but we'll get to that in a second. Powell?
Yeah, I'm with Nick Easter, to be fair. The thing that's always that I've had a problem with New Zealand, this might be wrong, but it was certainly off the back of watching the game at Twickenham and their opener against France, is that when they've been in a really intense game, and obviously they did a brilliant job against Ireland, but once they went 13-0 up in that game and in the other two games that I just mentioned, their command of possession and their ability to retain the ball comfortably has not always been has not always been right there. And I think ultimately it will give South Africa the instinct that they can control the game from the forwards and then kind of dictate the way it goes. And New Zealand can hit them with a few sucker punches, and there will be periods where they do control the game. But I just think that South Africa will have that control for longer. They'll be in the contest with 20 minutes to go, and I do think the bomb squad will do it again. I hope not, though, and that's not because I dislike South Africa at all. It's just that I don't like the idea of 3 replacement front rows winning a Team of World Cup. And I'm so in that regard, if it is 50-50 with 20 minutes to go, I would hope New Zealand come through. But I just think it might be too predictable, but I just think the same thing will happen again.
Yeah, interesting. I'm just going to one thing I'm going to put in there. I think that Fletcher Newell, who is the New Zealand backup tight head, I think that he's vulnerable. I don't think that the other guy is. Tamati Williams, I think, will come through as a great New Zealand prop.
Yeah.
No, I'm not saying instantly, but over the next.
Yeah, it's at this stage, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I guess that remains to be seen. Look, so Nick Powell, you're going South Africa from what you were saying. I don't think you officially said it.
Yeah, I'm going to say South Africa by 3.
Okay, so we've all...
and yeah, exactly. It would be in and around Nick Easter's prediction. The exact number.
And
right,
let's say 1916. 1916, for the sake of argument. Let's just say that, shall we?
Yeah, that leaves you sitting on the fence, Ollie.
No, it doesn't. No, I was ready to say my prediction at the start. I just decided not to because I wanted to see which way you guys are going. I'm exactly the same. I echo the 2 Nicks, not Kano, and I think it's going to be a case of South Africa seeing it out thanks to that power off the bench. So I'll go 21-18. So
that's pretty much given Nick Easter no chance of winning the we surrounded, unless it's exactly the same scoreline as 2003.
All right, I know. I'll go South Africa by 5. So I'll go 2015.
Okay.
Also, we've got Brendan Venter coming on the podcast on Monday. So obviously, in the interest of that podcast episode being a smiley one and not a sad one, I think we're all back in South Africa.
You don't want him to be angry.
Oh, you don't. He thinks about things deeply when he's angry.
Reference that is.
I don't think I'm going to mention that interview. It'll be so tempting, but yeah. All right, guys, we'll wrap up there. World Cup final, and of course, third place playoff to look forward to before the big tournament review next week. So, Nick Easter, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate your time. I apologise that we slightly ran over, but yeah, enjoy the final, and I'll catch you soon.
Thanks very much for having me. Love chatting. Love chatting about it.
The rugby just keeps on coming at the moment, and the Guinness Six Nations is just around the corner and will be upon us before we know it. Make it a year to remember by booking official hospitality with our friends at Keith Prowse, principal sales partner to England Rugby Hospitality. Their matchday experiences have a whole range of incredible features, from complimentary bars to menus designed by Michelin star chefs, namely Tom Kerridge, Ollie Little, and Tommy Banks. So, book your experience now and make memories that will last a lifetime. Visit keithprowse.co.uk/Twickenham now. Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Rugby Paper podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use and recommend the show to your friends. The Rugby Paper is available to buy every Sunday, and to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe through our print, digital and online options at therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions. That's therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions to get all our content for as little as 14p per day.